because what I want to do is just talk to the both the live participants and also the YouTube participants. Tonight we're going to be going through the details of the brochure that Resilient Diamond Heights published actually 2 years ago, which is entitled Planning Household Evacuations. I'm going to put a link to that document in the chat window so that you can then download that. And you can actually download, we have 5 brochures. We're going to concentrate on the evacuation one, but we have 4 other brochures. The link I'm going to put in the window lets you download all of those along with some worksheets. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a worksheet that you'll be working, you can work with your family in planning out evacuation drills. That will be downloadable from the same link that has the brochures. And for those of you that saw the heat emergency training that we did a couple of weeks ago, it also has the links to the infographics about heat illnesses. So I'll put that chat in the window. And then for those of you that are watching on YouTube, down in the bottom in the description on the YouTube, you'll find that link that I just mentioned, but you'll also find a link to the survey that we would like to have you fill out. Now, the one that we'll be using tonight is a different version of the survey, so I'll give you that link at the end of the program. We really do appreciate any feedback to help us improve the quality of the work that we're doing. But if you're watching on YouTube, the link down in the description will be both the link to the printed material as well as the link to the survey. And we really would like to have your feedback. So give me just a second here and I'll put those links in the chat window for you and then we'll get started. While I'm doing that, you're certainly welcome to have any questions that you might have. So that's the link to all of the printed material. By the way, if you want to save the chat at the end, when you open the chat window, there will be a little square box with 3 dots in it. If you want to save the chat so that you can then pick up any of these links later on, just click that little box and say save chat, and it will then put all of the copy from the chat window onto your computer so that you can come back later and find those links. Let me just check my notes and see if I've forgotten anything. Betsy alluded to the fact that we've been doing this for a long time. Resilient Diamond Heights, which was originally called Disaster Ready Diamond Heights, has been going for about 14 years. And the whole idea of the resiliency program is, in the case of a disaster, we can't count on the services of the city being instantly available like we would normally expect. So it might require that we as citizens be able to take care of ourselves and our neighbors for a period of time, especially after a huge disaster like an earthquake, that allows us to continue to be safe and caring, even though it might take hours to get an emergency vehicle to be able to respond to an event. So that's really the whole thing about the resiliency program, is knowing that there might be times that we have to take care of our family or our neighbors, even though we know that there are emergency personnel that are supposed to be doing this, but we might not be able to get them to respond quickly enough. So we'll talk about that a little bit tonight. And then tonight specifically, we're going to talk about 2 things, which is protecting your household against fire, and in the event of evacuation because of certain types of larger events, how to prepare your household for evacuations. So let me just do 2 things. First, I want to just make sure everybody's in. We got one more person coming. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the presentation. Let's see, I do this, and then I do, all right. One moment, please. I'll be.
Good. Well, while we're waiting for Greg, I'll say hi to Patricia. Patricia, thank you for joining us. It's really nice to have you.
Here we go.
Thank
All right. Okay, so we'll just ask everybody to mute themselves. I will actually do that from the desktop here as well. And then we'll get into the program. Okay, tonight we're going to be talking about fire safety. And as I mentioned, there are actually two different parts of this that we'll be going through. The first one, these are our learning objectives that we're going to be going to. I'm going to take just a few minutes to talking about a little more detail about what I said about the resiliency program, which is planning for all hazards. We started primarily with earthquakes, but realized that there are a lot more events that could happen that would affect a neighborhood. Then we're going to talk specifically about fire prevention and evacuations from your home in case you have experienced a fire yourself. Then we're going to talk about the broader story about neighborhood evacuations, which could be well, we'll talk about that in a second, the different types of evacuations that might be necessary. But it really begins with the way you plan for your home preparedness and then expand that to your neighborhood. And at the end, we will give you some resources for all kinds of hazards, including the 5 brochures that I had mentioned earlier. Planning for all hazards works like this. We think of earthquake as the one thing that's likely to happen in the Bay Area at some point in the future. And we also know that that's going to be not just a local disaster, but a regional disaster. So it's important that we all have our households ready and have equipment ready and have our safety kits ready. And if we are also want to do a little broader work, we can get trained with NERT and some of the other volunteer operations. But we also can think about chemical spills. If you had a truck that had a rupture and was carrying dangerous chemicals, it might mean that an entire neighborhood had to be evacuated. Or it could be something like the San Bruno gas main break, where suddenly, without any warning, an entire neighborhood was engulfed in flames. And that is another type of a disaster that might affect a large part of the neighborhood. One of the things that we didn't plan on was a worldwide pandemic. So the thing that was different about the COVID pandemic that we're in right now is we hadn't really considered that to be an option or an event that we might need to prepare for. So we have to invent all of our solutions while we're in the middle of the disaster, where it would be much better to be able to have the planning and preparation done ahead of time so that we already had a good idea of what to do. The way resiliency works is this. There's two parts of it, which is what happens before the event and what happens after the event. The first thing is the planning part, and that's where we have, in Diamond Heights at least, for 14 years, been looking at all of the different types of factors that we want to consider, and then look at different options that we have as far as how we are going to be able to deal with them. We then have education. When we say education, that generally is to the broader public. So that's what we're actually doing with this presentation, is providing a program that is tailored to the public, and we hope that we can get this message out as wide as we can. Training is a different thing. Training is more tailored to primarily your volunteers or specially trained people, so that when something happens, we have folks that have already got additional training so that they are able to help the other folks in the neighborhood because they already have a lot of preparation. We then collect assets. Diamond Heights has now, for 2 periods of funding through the city, been able to acquire a number of assets that would help in the case of an emergency, so that we have supplies ready to go, not particular for the COVID moment that we're in right now, but in the case of a fire or earthquake or something like that. We have been assembling assets, and we also will continue to do that as money becomes available. And then finally, we do mitigation. Betsy has really been a real leader as far as reducing the dangers of wildfires, especially in Glen Canyon, by working with the fire department, the police department, and the Parks and Rec department to, as much as possible, reduce the possibilities of fire that could break out in Glen Canyon. And as you probably are aware, the winds that come up that canyon can take a fire and whip it along at 30 or 40 miles an hour, as well as the fact that there are eucalyptus trees along the edge that also could become major factors. So as much as possible, we try to identify things that can be corrected in advance, and whenever we can, we try to mitigate those problems. Then the event takes place. We don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it takes place. And we go into the second part, which is the reaction part. In the first stage of reaction is response. So that is putting out the fire, or it is propping up the buildings, or it is helping people to get to safe spots. But it's just the response to whatever it is that the disaster happened to be. We then go into the rescue mode. So if we have to find ways to help people out of buildings, or maybe help to assist the fire department if they need additional help, that's all part of that rescue phase. A little bit later, we go into recovery mode, where we start to put together what we can, look at the buildings that are still habitable, fix the ones that can be fixed, being able to start to get things back to normal. A little bit later, we then do the rebuilding. So this is where we finally have the resources and the time to rebuild the things that have been destroyed. And hopefully, and this is part of resiliency, we want to be able to rebuild the neighborhood to at least as good as it was before the event, but maybe better. So the whole thing is that we want to look at a way to make it inviting for people to come back to the neighborhood, rather than what happened in New Orleans, which is thousands and thousands of people moved away and never came back because it was such a mess. And then finally, that brings us to the resilience, which is the people that are here and the people that remain want to stay because they have a real appreciation for the city and all of the things that it has to offer. So that's a really quick view of what resilience looks like. Tonight, we're going to take a look at part of that, which is educating you about what we can do, first of all, about household fires. First of all, I want to mention the planning sheet. That's the one that I showed on camera a few minutes ago. This is a sheet that lets you work with your family or household members to develop a plan of action in case of a house fire or home fire. The first thing that you do is you map your home so that you can take a look at where your exits are, and also any areas that might become a particular concern or danger. We then want to identify secondary exits, because there's a possibility that your main exit to your house is not usable. So it's important to know, if that were to happen, how would I get out safely through some secondary methods? We want to make sure that we have smoke detectors, smoke alarms installed, and we want to make sure we check them on a regular basis. We'll talk about that in detail in a little bit. An important thing is we select a reunification point. Now, this is a point outside your home. Probably in the case of home fires, it should be across the street from where you live, so that fire equipment can get to your location without you being in the way. But it's one that everyone in the household knows, because the idea is everybody needs to join together at that one spot so that we know everybody's gotten out safely. We then want to talk about our plan with our housemates and family. We want to then actually practice the fire drill. We should probably do that once or twice a year, especially if you have children, so that we now have an idea of what we need to do. But more importantly, as you walk through the drill, it helps your mind realize that you know what you're going to do in the case of an event. And that means in the event of an actual disaster, you're going to be able to do it with a lot more clarity and calmness than you would by just having to figure it out as you went. Kitchen fires are the most common fires. The San Francisco Fire Department is called to at least a dozen calls for service each day from cooking fires. And those normally are what they call confined to pot, which means that the fire itself never really got past the stove. But the fire department still wants to be sure that everything is secure and safe. So it's important that they come in and check. And by the way, if you live in a multi-unit building, the fire department is the only group that is allowed to turn off the alarm system. So even though you might have had burnt toast that set off the building's fire alarm, you still need to have the fire department come in and, first of all, make sure that it's not more than just burnt toast, but then make sure that the fire alarm has been properly silenced. Unattended pots on the stove, where you walk away and just forget that it's there, or accidentally turning on the burner, are most common causes of this kind of a problem. And it's just something to be aware that when you have something in the oven or on the stove, that you pay attention to it and don't let it get out of control. If it happens to spread into a cupboard or a wall, it might require that the fire department has to actually open that wall up with their axes and their equipment. So just realize that if the fire goes beyond the stove, it then is going to be more serious, and they have to make sure that that is not causing a hidden fire behind the walls that might be smoldering and could flare up later and possibly in the middle of the night. Grease fires cannot be put out with water, so you have to either use a fire extinguisher that is capable of work on grease fires, or if it's safe to do so, you can slide a lid over the top of the pan, but that's tricky because it's easy to get burned while you're doing that. But remember, you cannot use water to put out a grease fire. That is actually just going to spread the fire around because the burning grease will float on top of the water. And then always call 911 to check for extensions. So even though it seems like things are all under control, if you're not 100% sure, bring in the fire department, let them make sure that everything is as it should be. And by the way, they also have big fans on the truck so that if it's a case where there's a lot of smoke, they can help to air out the area so that can be made comfortable a lot faster. One of the things you might need to consider if your bedroom is on the second or third floor is you might want to look at how do you use a window as a secondary exit. So there are escape ladders. This one is unfolded, but the way this works is the ladder is all folded up next to the window. And if you need to use it as an escape route, you unfold it and then you can climb down from the second or third story. So that's something you may want to consider if you don't have a really clear secondary exit to your home. Hollow core doors don't stop fires very well. So if you have hollow core doors, you might want to think about replacing them if you own your own property. A solid core door will block a fire for a lot longer period of time. You also can look at using battery operated emergency lights. I'm going to show you one of those during the question and answer period in a little bit. But what they do is act as a night light during normal times. But if your power goes out, they automatically switch over to a battery operated light so that you can then still see your way around and you can actually unplug the light and use it as a flashlight. You want to keep shoes and flashlight near your bed because in the case of a house fire at night, you probably have about 2 or 3 minutes to get out of the house safely. So you don't want to have to stumble around looking for shoes. And if you have a flashlight near the bed, it will make it much easier for you to be able to maneuver around. During a fire, you want to make sure everyone is awake. And if you have kids, it's important to remember that oftentimes kids get scared and hide under beds or in closets. This is why it's important to do the fire drill so that the children have this notion that it's more important to get safely out of the building than it is to hide. But it's something to make sure that everyone is awake. And if you have children, to make sure that they are accounted for. Remember that the smoke rises and more people die of smoke inhalation than burns in a fire. So if you have a house fire, stay close to the floor. Normally you want to crawl on your hands and knees so that the smoke is above you and you are still down in the clear air where you have a better chance of breathing. If you come to a closed door, you need to check it for heat. And the way you do that is you put the back of your hand near the door or the doorknob. And if you sense any heat, you know that it's unsafe to open that door because the fire is on the other side. So you're going to have to look at either a secondary exit, or you want to then seal the bottom of the door with towels or cloths to keep smoke from coming in, and then try to signal for help at a window if it's something where you just can't get through that door. And this is important. You want to call 911, but you do it after you evacuate. You want to make sure that everybody is out of the house safely and at the reunification point, and then you call 911. It might seem counterintuitive, but it's a matter of just a couple of minutes difference between making sure everyone is safe and then having the fire equipment on the way to save what they can of the property. Account for everyone and do not go back into a burning building. Even if you think that somebody is left behind, the firefighters have fire-resistant clothing so that they can go into a building. They also have air tanks so that they can go in without having to worry about the smoke poisoning them. So even though it might be a tough thing to do, it's important that once you're out, stay outside and let the emergency teams do what they can as far as rescuing anybody that might be inside. If you decide to fight a fire, it's important to call 911 first. Even though you have a fire extinguisher, you're not sure whether it's going to be adequate to be able to put the fire out. So excuse me, make sure that help is on the way. Never fight a major fire. First of all, we recommend, or the NERT actually recommends, that you have at least 2 fire extinguishers of the size 4A 40BC. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later on. But you want one that's a little bit larger than just the cheap ones that you find on the counter at the drugstore. And if it's anything larger than a waste paper basket fire, it's probably too large to put out with a home style fire extinguisher. So in that case, get out. And then avoid becoming trapped. It's important that the door is to your back. Your escape route has to be open so that you do not find that you end up between, or that the fire ends up between you and your escape route. So have your back to the door, be ready to flee, and flee if the fire becomes too large to contain. And finally, think pass, and we'll talk, we're going to see a movie in a second that explains this, is how you operate a fire extinguisher. Pass means P is for pull, which is pull the pin, A is for aim, S is for squeeze the handle, and the second S is for sweep. And to get an idea of what that means, we have this little movie that comes from Consumer Reports that will show you how that works.
The time to learn how to use your fire extinguisher is not when you discover a fire, but if the time does come, remember to pass. P, pull the pin, hold the extinguisher away from you, and release the locking mechanism. A, aim low, pointing the extinguisher at the base of the fire. S, squeeze the lever slowly and evenly. S, sweep the nozzle from side to side. You will see different categories of extinguisher, but combination fire extinguishers that can put out anything from an oil to an electrical fire, labeled ABC, are best for home protection because it's hard to predict what will be burning. You need one of these multi-purpose fire extinguishers on each level of your home. For added protection, keep an ABC extinguisher in your garage and a small one in your car. And a small extinguisher specifically for kitchens should be mounted on the wall. Consumer Reports tests show that heavier extinguishers deliver retardant more quickly and for a longer time. So buy the largest ones you can comfortably handle.
So that's a quick explanation of how to use a fire extinguisher. I'll just review those points. You want at least 2 and more. As they said, you might want one in your garage and other areas. 4A 40BC means that 4A is the wood and paper part of the fire extinguishing. The little bitty ones are called 1A 10BCs. The 4A has 4 times as much material for the A type material, and then B is for grease fires and C is for electrical fires. So they're a little bit larger, they cost just a little bit more, but they give you a much better chance of being able to do the job if a fire breaks out. And as the little movie explained, they do sell just kitchen type fire extinguishers. Those wouldn't have the A part of them. That would just be a BC type, but that would be good to have in case of a grease fire on the stove. And then train everybody on its use. Make sure people understand that notion of PASS so that they know what to do in case it's needed. Every 6 months, you should check to make sure that they're in good condition. They have a little pressure gauge on the side. The little needle should point in the green zone. If it's in the red zone, it either needs to be replaced or it needs to be recharged. You can, on the better quality ones, you can take them to fire equipment companies and they will recharge them, which will be a little less expensive than buying a new one. Make sure nothing's obstructing the nozzle. Sometimes lint or spider webs or things like that get in the nozzle, so you want to make sure that that's open. And then you should tip the fire extinguisher upside down and shake it, because the fire extinguishing agent is actually a powder, and the powder cakes in the bottom and becomes less likely to be able to be used if it's all stuck in the bottom of the fire extinguisher. So shake it up and down, and if you don't feel the powder moving around, you need to either recharge or replace the fire extinguisher. At least every 5 years, you should do that. You should have it either inspected by a professional and recharged. They'll put new powder in it and new pressure, and or you can buy a new one. They're not that expensive. Finally, remember the PASS thing: pull, aim, sweep, squeeze, and sweep. That's the thing to remember. Smoke detectors are important, and make sure that you have them installed. You need one in each sleeping area. Plus, you should have one in the hallway outside or stairways if you're in a multi-story residence. The smoke detectors probably won't call 911. If you're in an apartment, for example, the apartment that I live in has smoke detectors inside the unit, but they're not connected to the central system. So if they go off because maybe I burned the toast, as long as I can air out the smoke, they will stop making their noise, but they haven't called the fire department. If I open the front door, I'm going to let the smoke out into the hallway, which means it will call the fire department. And now you have to wait for the fire engines to get there, and the alarm in the building will be going until the firefighters get there. Smoke detectors are supposed to be replaced every 10 years. And the reason for that is the little elements inside that detect the smoke wear out. And you want to make sure that they are good quality and are ready to do the best they can as far as sensitivity. And you'll find that you can no longer buy smoke detectors with replaceable batteries. The reason for that is there have been so many instances where there have been fires with fatalities. They find that there are smoke detectors in the building, but the people have taken the batteries out, probably because the smoking odors had tripped them off. So they're no longer replaceable. So every 10 years, the batteries are going to start beeping, and you have no choice but to replace them with a new unit because the batteries are no longer replaceable. Outside of your home, trim the grass and other vegetations. They recommend at least a 30-foot clearance from all sides of your home so that if there is a fire that's coming from a distance, you have what they call a defensible zone between your house and the flammable grass or other vegetation, especially as things get drier. Things that are nice and green part of the year suddenly become very flammable if they dry out. Store combustible materials safely. That means usually not having them inside of the living area. If you can put things in your garage or in a metal cabinet so that they're away from the main living area, that will make things a lot safer. Maintain your appliances, especially if you have gas for your stove and for your possibly water heater and furnace. Make sure that you have those inspected on a regular basis so that they don't become a fire hazard in their own. And most importantly, have adequate insurance. If you are a renter, renter's insurance is very inexpensive, but it will cover losses due to fire. If you have a home, you probably are required to have insurance by whoever owns your mortgage. But make sure you have adequate insurance so that if something should happen, you don't really have to worry about the loss of your property because the insurance should help to replace that. Now, I'm going to stop the screen sharing now and open up for questions. First of all, I'll just ask Ed whether anybody has posted any questions in the window yet.
Yes, there's one question. Are there any ladders that a child can use easily?
So probably, it depends on the size of the child, I suppose. They're kind of bulky. It probably is going to be something that an adult would have to deploy. Once they're deployed, the child it's just basically climbing a ladder at that point. So as far as being able to use it once it's deployed, probably that would be easy. I think you might be able, if you look around, there might be some more expensive ones that actually are deployed with a lever. So those would be probably several $100s, but that I suppose is a possibility that you don't actually have to lift the ladder out of the box and deploy it yourself. You have to do a little shopping about that, but I think in most cases, for a small child anyway, it would probably be difficult. Does anybody else have any questions that you want to mention or just conversation before we go back into the next part?
I do have another question,
Yeah.
on the smoke detectors.
Yes.
You said that you can't buy a smoke detector now that has a replaceable battery.
Correct.
Well, in my experience, the ones with the replaceable batteries, the batteries don't last 10 years.
No, they normally have to replace every year. So if you have replaceable batteries, you should replace them every year, even though they might not gone into that little chirpy mode yet.
Yeah.
The batteries are not going to last 10 years now.
So on these ones with non-replaceable batteries, will they last 10 years?
Yes, and they actually have a timer in them. So even though the battery's not dead, in 10 years they start to chirp. So they kind of remind you that it's time to go out and buy a new one.
Okay.
But yeah, the batteries are supposed to last the 10 years, and then like I say, they actually have a timer and not a battery sensor. So after 10 years, whether or not the battery is dead, they're going to start reminding you to buy a new one. That's also true of carbon monoxide detectors. Those also start chirping after 10 years, even if they might still be working, kind of, sort of. Okay, any other questions? All right, just check to see nobody else is waiting to get in. Okay, cool. So we're going to go back into the slide deck now and talk about the second part of this.
I do have another question if it may just appear.
Yes.
The question is, do newer smoke detectors also pick up gas leaks?
So you can get them, so they don't, okay, so they don't actually pick up gas leaks. They pick up CO, carbon monoxide. So you can get carbon monoxide by themselves, or you can get combination of smoke and carbon monoxide or CO. They might trigger with a gas leak, but they're really for CO. So that would be something like a generator that's running too close to your house, or perhaps you have a leak in your pilot light in your water heater that is causing things to not burn correctly, so you are accumulating carbon monoxide. So you can get combination CO and smoke. But I don't think that they actually are sensing for natural gas, although maybe natural gas would set them off. And they're the same thing as the smoke detectors. They don't have replaceable batteries in those either. Okay, any other questions? Cool, we're doing okay on time. We should be done in plenty of time. So we'll jump back into the second part of this. Let's see.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Hey, Greg?
Yes.
Yeah. Just if we have time, I'll just add a quick comment here. This is that when you look at the codes on a fire extinguisher, that second number, the second double-digit number, like 20 or 40, just in case anybody wants to use it as sort of a reference point, that is the approximate number of seconds worth of extinguishing agent that you have. So the number 40 under normal usage, number 40 would represent 40 seconds of extinguishing agent. And so you can kind of use your judgment there as to what capacity you have based on the size of fire you have.
Thank you, Cynthia. For those of you that don't know Cynthia, she's also a member of our Resilient Diamond Heights group and was a former fire inspector for the SF Fire Department. So she always has great information, and quite a bit of the information in the brochure, as well as what this presentation is based on, was with Cynthia's help. So we appreciate having her expertise. Okay, thank you, Cynthia. We're going to jump back in then to the next part. So we're going to talk about planning evacuations. And the interesting thing is here, the planning and the practice is pretty much the same thing as what we just talked about for your own home safety, except now we're looking at a larger scale. I'm going to talk about a few of the events that have happened recently that really elicit the reason for needing an evacuation plan from your neighborhood. On June 5th of this year, Portola Hill had a huge grass fire breakout caused by fireworks that ended up coming within a very close distance of the public housings on the Portola Hill website. I'm sorry, Portrero. I got the wrong neighborhood there. It's not Portola, it's Portrero. I have the wrong thing on the slide there. So it's Portrero over by the freeways. So these are some fires from that event. It's the first time I've ever seen Alert SF come up with this, which says evacuate, evacuate, evacuate. And then they listed a number of blocks on Dakota. And then right behind it, evacuate some more blocks in Missouri. And this is the first time that I've actually seen that come up with that kind of urgency. And as it turns out, the fire department was able to get the fire under control, but it was literally within the width of a street from one of the apartment buildings up on Potrero. So it's one of those events which was very close to a disaster. It was something where our fire department was able to just in time get the fire under control, but it had that potential of causing at least one of the buildings and possibly more than one of those buildings to end up becoming engulfed. When we talk about the North Bay fires in Santa Rosa and Napa in 2017, one of the things about that is there was no advance warning from the city. until 2 in the morning, when there were sheriff's deputies knocking on the doors of the homes, telling people that they had to evacuate. And there was 8 minutes or less for people to pack everything that they needed and get into their car and evacuate. And then as they started evacuating because of the terrain of these fires, they were now driving down twisted mountain roads that were surrounded by fires. I'm sure you've seen videos of those types of escapes, which resulted in 8,400 buildings being consumed. Most of those were homes, and 44 people that died. So that's this is actually the event that started us on this journey of producing these safety brochures for Resilient Diamond Heights, because we just couldn't find any single little simple piece of information that we could use to educate people about how to take care of themselves in the case of a major disaster. And of course, the year after that, there were similar fires, again, up in the mountains where we had entire towns consumed. And then this is today's fire. This is the one that was at 14th Street in Folsom. It was a 5-alarm fire. It started at 6:30 in the morning. It was under control by about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, but it consumed at least 6 large buildings. There were evacuations, and I don't know whether there were any residential evacuations needed, but I know that the Red Cross was brought in because there were over 100 people that worked in those buildings that had to find a safe shelter. So this is another example where, without warning, you might suddenly find that something has happened in your neighborhood that's going to require you to get to a place of safety. How much time does it take? This is a little movie that was done out of a TV station in Colorado that talks about what a family is going to do if they're suddenly faced with a disaster.
Are you ready for a disaster? If you had just 10 minutes warning to evacuate, do you have a plan? What would you grab? We decided to put one family through a practice drill. News First 5's Jeanette Hines is here live to explain the setup for us. Jeanette?
Lisa, the Boswells knew a news crew was coming to their house, but they had no idea what we were going to ask them to do. Imagine grabbing all of your stuff in just 10 minutes. Photojournalist Adam Napick and I picked up cameras so we could show you as many angles as possible. Then, with the help from the American Red Cross, we put them through an evacuation drill. Hello?
This is a drill.
Okay.
There is a wildfire that's forcing the evacuation of your neighborhood. You have 10 minutes to get whatever you need and leave the neighborhood.
10 minutes?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. We have 10 minutes to get whatever we can. We got to evacuate the house because it may burn down. So, 10 minutes to get whatever's important. Okay. Okay. Can you dolls? How about your new doll?
Ruby, you don't need to take that many. Some things are taken.
Laptop. Got my laptop. Close there. Socks. Just grabbing some old stuff from my grandparents when they passed away. Bills that need to be paid. Contact lens stuff.
Knitting stuff. Books.
Medication. There's just so much to think about and just not a whole lot of things to take. I'm trying to think of where I have other important things. I don't know. What's important? I don't even know if I have underwear. I better get underwear. Let me go get underwear. Kids, pack your underwear. Oh my gosh.
Did you hear your mom?
Yes, I gotta go get my underwear. Do we need any towels for anything? Maybe.
You got everything you need?
Uh-huh.
What do you got?
I have my special balls, my blanket, and clothes.
I don't think we need towels. Okay. All right. A box and a bear for my grandmother and my grandfather.
You have 4 minutes.
A box somewhere that has a bunch of files, and I don't know where it even is. Maybe insurance policies or passports, birth certificates. Oh, they're upstairs. Okay. Hey, guys, grab some bottles of water out of the garage. All right. My purse. Clothes. Okay, photographs, pictures. Some photos of my brother and I. Wedding album.
My mom and dad's honeymoon and my baby up.
Grab all the apples. Grab those. This cheese rounds got some protein. Ruby here. Okay. There you go. Did you get the peanut butter? It's in the cabinet. Peanut butter. Okay.
And time. 10 minutes is up.
So that kind of sets the scene of if you don't have a plan and if you're not organized, how quickly time passes, especially when things are not going well. So what you want to think about is, what if this is the front door that you open? Maybe it would have been this morning in the Mission, or it might be that there is something that has happened beyond the front of your building. The first thing you want to do is make an evacuation plan. And this is just like the plan that we did for our home, except now it's for our neighborhood. First of all, you want to have 2 reunification points. The first one is the one that we already talked about. That's the one that's probably across the street from your home. It's something that you have maybe a mailbox or maybe a fire hydrant, or perhaps some other landmark that everybody knows that this is the point that we're going to meet. But then you need a second one that's a little farther from your home in case your home is in the center of the problem. You want to find at least one alternative route to your neighborhood. Now, if you have a car and are planning on driving, you want to think about another route in case you cannot use your car. So when we're talking a second route, you would want a second route from a driving perspective, but also a second one in case you're not able to drive because of the issue at hand. And when you're doing this, it's a good idea to work with your neighbors to develop a plan for your block, because you can't wait for the city to come in and give you your escape route. First of all, there is no such agency in the city that does that. But secondly, every neighborhood is going to be different. And as far as being able to figure out what your specific escape route might look like, you're really going to need to customize that to your exact location and the type of building that you're in. And remember, you might need to walk. So whatever you do, always have an idea of, if you needed to walk out of your neighborhood, what is the safest and easiest way to do that. And finally, as you're doing this planning, identify any obstacles or dangers that you might have along your escape route. So here's another little video. This one was from here in San Francisco that really kind of tells you how to go about picking out an alternate route.
Volunteers fanned out in the Berkeley Hills today to survey the area's many walking paths. A century ago, the dirt and concrete paths provided connections to public transit. But now, as KPIX5's John Ramus explains, they could be crucial in a major wildfire.
The twisting, winding neighborhoods of the Berkeley Hills were laid out in the early 1900s, when most people caught trolley cars to work. So a series of 136 footpaths were created to serve as direct shortcuts down the hills.
It was seen as a selling point that even though you were way up in the hills, you could get very quickly down to get the streetcar.
But many of the streets here are so narrow that after the disastrous Oakland Hills firestorm of 1991, people began looking at the footpaths in a different light.
Imagine with an emergency, possibly at night with smoke, people a little bit in a panic, the paths are going to be your best way down on foot.
So this morning, a group called the Berkeley Path Wanderers gathered to walk all the pathways in a single day to assess their condition and take notes in case they are ever needed as emergency evacuation routes.
Is the handrail like for the whole length of the path, or is it just partial? And where is it? Is it in the middle or is it on the side of the path?
The volunteers set off, examining how well the pathways were marked and noting locations of broken concrete or low-hanging vegetation. The idea is to gather enough information to create an evacuation plan for the residents.
But I've never really thought about what would happen if everybody was trying to leave at the same time.
Danny Levy lives on a street that's a tight fit for a Prius, let alone a fire engine. He realizes what would happen if a major fire broke out here.
If we needed to leave, we'd be on foot, because it's in a car. If everybody tried to get in their cars, it just wouldn't work.
That's why they want neighbors here to begin thinking about how they would get out and how the pathways may end up being more than just a shortcut to a streetcar. They may one day save lives. In Berkeley, John Ramus, KPIX5. So
that's food for thought, especially if you're living in an area on hills, or maybe along Glen Canyon where the houses are on stilts or things like that. How would you get out if you had to? When you are planning for your evacuation, also consider neighbors helping neighbors. So remember, we're talking about all hazards. So it may not be a fire, it could be an earthquake, it could be a chemical spill, and as well as wildfires. So anything that might suddenly be a major disruption or disaster in your neighborhood is where we're talking about having a plan of action and being ready to go. If there is time, alert your neighbors. You pound on their door, you call or text them if you have that information. You sound your horn if you're driving. But if you can, try to let other people in your neighborhood know of the danger. However, be careful, do not take too long if it's going to endanger yourself or your family. So do what you can as far as notifying others, but make sure that you have first priority for your own well-being. Evacuation guidelines is be prepared. First of all, carry only the bare essentials. In the little movie from Colorado, we saw how it was tempting to add stuff when there were only minutes to spare. Get everyone to the reunification point. Make sure everybody's accounted for. Make sure that you have a contact person outside of the immediate area. This is important because, especially in an earthquake, cell service and the internet might not work. Even though you might think you have a landline because you have a telephone that rings, if it's connected through Comcast or some other service like AT&T, it's actually not a landline anymore. It's what's called VoIP, which means if the internet is out, so is your telephone. Now, one thing to remember is that text messages might go through even if voice doesn't. So if you are trying to send a message to your contact person who should be living in an adjacent state or at least in an adjacent county, even though you might not be able to call and talk to them as a voice call, if you send a text, it can, after a period of delays, eventually go through. You probably will have to check your phone, and if it has a little red icon that says message failed, you can try to resend and resend and resend until it goes through. But text is a little bit more reliable than voice if your immediate area cell towers are not working. Determine whether driving is an option. If it is, as we said, try to have a second escape route in mind. If the city has called an evacuation center, you need to know where to meet. This is where it's important to have a portable AM/FM radio. That might be your only reliable source of communications with the command center or the emergency response teams. And the brochures that we publish have the frequencies, but it's KQED FM and it's KCBS AM are the two official stations that would be used to communicate to the public during a major disaster. And then, as we said, be prepared to walk. Even though you might want to be able to drive out, there might just be too many problems with that. And so make sure that you have some path figured out where you can walk out if you have to. And then if you have people that have disabilities, walking disabilities, or maybe just difficulties with arthritis or sciatica and so on, if you can help people with disabilities, do the best you can to be a good neighbor in that response. Remember, when you are going, you're not going camping. So you want to have a go bag ready, and that will have the essentials, but this is not where you're going to plan to go live in a tent for a few days or a few weeks. What you're trying to do is just get to a place of safety or a public shelter. And so you want to have that ready to go with the bare essentials. So this is important, that this is not your shelter kit. The shelter kit is what includes your 3 days worth of water and your 2 weeks worth of food and a tent and all kinds of other stuff. This is not what we're saying. This is a smaller part of that, which is your go bag. Now, in the brochure that I'm going to show you at the end, we list these things for you, but I'll just quickly go through what your go bag should have. It should have a basic first aid kit. It should have an LED flashlight with fresh batteries. Now, LED is the new type of flashlight, which is much less likely to, well, first of all, it consumes batteries at a much slower rate. So an LED flashlight will last a lot longer than the old style with a little light bulb in it. And it also will never burn out. An LED is planned to use for 10,000 hours before it burns out. So it's much more reliable, but mostly it's much more efficient with batteries. You need either a battery operated or a crank type AM/FM radio. In San Francisco, the stations that you would turn to if you needed would be 740 AM for KCBS or 88.5 for KQED. That will be where you get official information from the city. You should have $100 in small bills, because what is likely to happen is that credit card readers and ATM systems might not work because either the power is out or the internet is out at stores. So what you want to do is have a small amount of cash available, and that should be readily available in your go bag, so that if you can't use a credit card, you have a way to buy things that you might need. You should have photocopies of your insurance documents, your property list. So it would be a good idea for any of your more expensive property to have the model number and the cost and the serial numbers, so that when you go to file insurance claims, you can then get reimbursed. If you have living wills or powers of attorney, you should have copies of those so that those are with you. You should have paper copies of phone numbers. Your phone address book might not work because if the cell tower is down, you might not have access to phone numbers in your address book. You should have a cell phone battery pack with the cables that you need to hook it up to your phone. And you should recharge that every 6 months, because batteries will self-discharge over time. So every 6 months, you want to top off the charge so that it's always ready to go. If you have a pet, you should have a pet carrier and food. If you have children, you should have small toys to keep them occupied for the period of time. And then for each person, you should have a liter of water, not a gallon, but a liter or a quart of water. Energy bars to provide about 500 calories or more, and you refresh those every year so that they don't get stale and hard to chew. If you have baby, you need baby formula. That probably will have to stay in the refrigerator until you leave, but make it ready to go. Mylar safety blankets are a great idea. Those are the little shiny metal blankets that fold about the size of a handkerchief, but that can keep you warm, and plastic rain pouches can keep you dry if it happens to be inclement weather. For each person, you should have photocopies of identification, which would be your passport if you're have a green card or driver's license, so that you have copies even if you don't have the originals. And essential medications. Now, if the medications don't need refrigeration, you should rotate the go bag supply every time you get a new prescription, so that the items that in your go bag are fresh. If the medication has to be refrigerated, make sure that you grab them on the way out the door. A couple small bottles of hand sanitizer, and either an N95 or hazard mask, and that would be for each person. Now, all of this is covered in the brochure on sheltering, and there's a second list, which is all the other things that you should have in your home, which we call the shelter kit, and that would be the more bulky stuff like water and food and things like that. So be sure that you download the brochure so that you have this list available. And this is the sheltering brochure that I'm talking about, which gives you a lot of other information as well as the lists that you need for your safety supplies. Excuse me. If you're going to escape by car, remember to have a small go bag in your trunk as well. That would be a basic first aid kit, a small fire extinguisher, some basic protein bars. You don't really need to have a lot more than that, because if you can go by car, you'll be able to get to a place of safety within a relatively short period of time. Know how to open your garage door if you have a garage door opener. Most garage doors have a safety device inside in the form of a rope with a handle that you pull down so that the door can be opened even if the power is out. That varies from one type of garage door to another. So look at your instruction manual for your garage door to understand how that works. Also realize that that rope is a way that burglars can get into your garage by reaching in with a coat hanger or something and pulling the rope. So there are some tricks that you can do about either blocking the space above your door so that you can't get a device through there, or you can put the rope up out of reach so that it's not accessible from the outside. You can go on the internet and find some examples of how to do that if you want to make sure that your garage door is more secure. Your car should never go below a quarter of a tank of gas, because you need to be able to get out of the neighborhood sufficiently without having to worry about running out of gas. So anytime your gas gauge gets below a quarter full, try to remember to top it off so that it's better than that. Know your secondary routes so that you know if there's a fire engine parked on the street that you normally drive on, you can go the secondary route and be able to get out. Be prepared to walk, which is that even in your best planning, it might not be possible to drive. So you're always going to have to think about maybe you're going to have to walk to a place of safety. This is important. Subscribe to Alert SF. Alert SF is a text messaging service that is run by the Emergency Operations Center from San Francisco. And it's really easy to join. The first thing that you do is you send a new message, and the phone number you send it to is 888-777. And that is just this, that's the same number for any place that you are in San Francisco. And then in the message part of the message, put your zip code. So put in your zip code, and then it will only send you messages that apply to things that are near you. So for example, the fire this morning in the Mission was a wide area type of event. So they sent that message probably citywide. I got a copy. I don't know if the whole city did, but in smaller disasters, they don't bother you with what's going on far, far away from where you live. But by knowing your zip code, they will be able to make it more tailored to where you're living. And if you want, you can add more than, you can do this more than once. So if you want to add a second zip code for your office, or maybe a second zip code for your school, you can repeat this as many times as you want if you want to have more than one area that's being covered. Or you can go online at www.alertsf.org, and you can subscribe to it that way. But the easiest way is to just use your phone to send a text message, and you'll be automatically subscribed. You can always unsubscribe if you want to. If it starts to get annoying, you can unsubscribe by just saying, you send back a text message that says unsubscribe, and it will take you out of that. And then get the whole story. We have the 5 brochures that I mentioned earlier. I'm going to just quickly describe those to you now. The link is the Castor Patrol link, and then I'll put that in. I guess I already put that in the window. This gives you links to all 5 of the brochures plus some of these auxiliary documents. The evacuation flyer is the one that we just covered. The heat emergency one is the one that we covered 2 weeks ago, and that is explaining how to stay safe during a heat emergency and how to recognize heat illnesses and how to apply first aid so that you can help people recover, or in the case of heat stroke, knowing that you need to call 911 because that's a serious condition. The one on sheltering gives you your list of go bag and shelter kit supplies, but it also gives you a lot more information about staying connected and how to shelter safely. The one on food safety is assuming that you are without electrical power for more than a few hours. So food safety applies to when you are looking at long-term power outages, but it also gives you a list of durable food items that you can stock up in general. So that would be things that have a long shelf life, that also maybe not quite as tasty as you're used to, but they will be good enough that you can survive those even if you can't get to a grocery store or the grocery store has been completely emptied. And it also talks about having enough water to supply your drinking and cooking needs for a period of 3 days or more. And then the final brochure is on sanitation. That is what to do if you have a long-term water outage. Remember that if you don't have water, you have exactly 1 flush left in your toilet. And after that, there is no more flushes left until the water comes back on. So that talks about the way that you would handle human waste in the case of emergencies where you might have a water outage that goes days or weeks. After an earthquake is a great example for that, how to do that safely and how to maintain sanity. So download all 5 of those brochures, print them out so that you have a copy. If we ever get back to in-person events, we always have paper printed versions of that as well. But that gives you pretty much everything you need to have a safe home that you can use in a variety of types of disasters. And then build the resilience in advance. Get to know your neighbors and bring them into the conversation. If you're part of a resiliency group in one of the neighborhoods, be part of the volunteer or leadership group so that you can continue to customize the needs to your particular neighborhood. Catalog the abilities and equipment that you already have. So that means if you have people in your neighborhood that maybe have licenses as contractors or maybe are medically trained or perhaps have other skills that would be helpful in an emergency, you know who those people are and how to get in touch with them. And there may be equipment that would be handy to have, like pry bars or stretchers or wheelchairs. So by knowing where these things are in advance, it gives you a head start on being able to help the neighborhood when you need it. And then continue to build out and update your shelter kit, including food and water. We all have great intentions about needing to have our safety kit available. Don't think that you have to do it all at once. Begin gradually and add to it as you go until you finally get to the point where you're comfortable with having enough equipment in your home to be able to protect yourselves. Continue to learn new skills. We hope that you found this helpful, and also we'll post the link to the previous one on heat emergencies, as well as some of the other types of learning that you can do online. And then establish a safety plan with your household and make sure that you practice those drills from time to time. And then help your neighborhood. If you haven't already taken NERT training, it's free of charge. I don't know when they'll be able to hold them again, but in a 6-week training program, you learn everything you need to know about keeping yourself healthy and safe in an earthquake, as well as being able to help your neighborhood, or become a volunteer for your resiliency program. For example, Diamond Heights, we have our sheltering volunteers that if we need to open St. Aidan's Church as either a heat relief center or as a shelter during a disaster, we have volunteers that are trained to be able to help out in those types of events. And so thank you for attending.